Shalom. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodesh. Double honors to the elders and the apostles of Great Millstone, and peace and blessings to the elect. And today we're going to go into the book of 1 Samuel, the second chapter, continuing from the first chapter, right, ending off with the Lord hearing Hannah's prayer and blessing her with with Samuel, whom she dedicates onto the Lord. Okay, and so in her rejoicing, right, we get into the intro of 1 Samuel, the second chapter, in Hannah's song of thanksgiving, which is spiritual, right, and you can see some you know prophetic hints or tones in there as she basically sings this song of thanksgiving here. So this is 1 Samuel chapter 2, verse 1. And Hannah prayed and said, or I guess I should say the prayer. But it says, and Hannah prayed and said, my heart rejoiceth in the Lord Yahweh. Mine horn is exalted in the Lord Yahweh. Okay, which usually a horn is symbolizes like power or strength. And here Hannah is rejoicing in that the Lord has strengthened her in the faces of her adversary, which would have been Peninnah, who constantly provoked her. But the Lord has strengthened her by blessing her with Samuel. And I believe, let me see if it was in this chapter or the one before. Yeah, okay, so yeah, right here. The Lord blessed her with Samuel. It says here, my mouth is enlarged over mine enemies, because I rejoice in thy salvation. So basically saying like, I can finally now, like I can say something back, like in the past, she was just quiet, having been, mocked and so on and so forth. But now, as she says, I rejoice in thy salvation, meaning in the Lord's deliverance of her, of that, of that barren state, right? And the reproach, you could say, let me call it that. And in fact, this actually is an example, right? When the scriptures mention like reproach, like basically a woman that cannot have children in the ancient world, it was a reproachful thing unto them, right? And that was emphasized by the behavior that Peninnah showed towards Hannah and her reaction, right? Unlike today, which is like it's looked at differently, but in the ancient in the ancient world is a very big deal. Verse 2, there is none holy as the Lord Yahweh, for there is none beside thee, neither is there any rock like our God. Right? There's nobody else like the Lord, all right, or any other rock, which is like your power or your safe haven or your strength, like our God. Talk no more exceeding proudly, let not arrogancy come out of your mouth. For the Lord Yahweh is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. Now, also, as you listen to this, it almost sounds like, there's a few, shots thrown at Peninnah over there. Okay, as because in a practical sense, right? Even though Hannah kept it within, she definitely felt the type of way about that, right? And if you were in her shoes, more than likely you would as well. So now with the rejoicing, you can see why she is so zealous, in her rejoiceful prayer here, for the Lord having heard and answered her prayers. So as it says, talk no more exceeding proudly, let not arrogancy come out of your mouth. So, just generally speaking, right? Don't move around with an arrogant mouth as though like you have and another doesn't, and everything is all sweet, because the Lord listens and he is a God of knowledge, and by him actions are weighed. So he weighs everybody's actions, and then he takes appropriate measures accordingly. And then she goes on to highlight, almost like the balance. Let me put that, the balance in the dealings of the Lord, right? So as she says, the bows of the mighty men are broken, and they that stumbled are girded with strength. See, so the Lord breaks down the mighty men. Now, this is, though, like on the flip side, right? So let's say the mighty men that are proud in their might, the Lord breaks them down. Okay, and their bows represent like their power or their strength or their weapons. And then on the flip side, right, those that stumbled, the Lord girds with strength, or he raises them up, right? They that were full have hired out themselves for bread, right? Once again, and they that were full, and this is like from the perspective of like the once again the balance, right? Those that had it all, but in pride, the Lord, they became arrogant or haughty or whatnot, and the Lord sort of brings that down. So he brings down those that are on high and raises up those that are low. That's basically the theme here that Hannah is mentioning, and it's similar to her case, right? Because she was low and Peninnah was high, but now the Lord had brought her up as well. So it says here, they that were full have hired themselves for bread, and full meaning like they were good, right? They had whatever they needed, they weren't lacking. But now they've been brought so low that they hired themselves out for bread, meaning like they basically like sold themselves or labored now just to get something to eat. And they that were hungry ceased. See, and on the flip side, those that were hungry that didn't have, now, as it says, ceased, as in now they had, now they're full, or that hunger ceased, so that the barren hath borne 7, and she that hath many children is waxed feeble. See, so who do you think this is in reference to? Because the you know Hannah would be likened onto the barren, right? And the one with many children would be likened onto Peninnah. Now, when it says here, have borne 7, what Hannah is saying is like the one who was lacking, right, who was barren, who couldn't even have one, is now, the Lord is now blessed to bear in abundance, as opposed to the one who had basically now waxing feeble, right, getting old and worn down, you could say. The Lord Yahweh killeth and maketh alive. He bringeth down to the grave and bringeth up, right, which is the balance and the power of the Lord. In other words, good and evil come from the Lord. The Lord Yahweh maketh poor and maketh rich. He bringeth low and lifteth up. He raiseth up the poor out of the dust and lifteth up the beggar from the dunghill. So those that are in a low place, right, in the ground, so to speak, which represents a low place, or the beggar on the dunghill, the trash area, trying to find ends meet. The Lord is able to raise one up from there, as it says, to set them among princes and to make them inherit the throne of glory, which is also symbolic, right, or spiritual, because that's like the state or the story of Israel, right, having been brought down as a nation, right, to that very, very, very low point, to where even now it's so common to actually see Israel in this condition, literally. Okay, but the Lord is the one with the power to actually raise them up from that position, or raise us up, as it says, to make them inherit the throne of glory. For the pillars of the earth are the Lord Yahweh's. The pillars mean like the foundation of the earth belongs to the Lord, and he hath set the world upon them, right? So he basically has set or built this world upon those foundations that he has set. And this is like magnifying or glorifying the Lord. He will keep the feet of his saints, and the wicked shall be silent in darkness. When it says he will keep the feet of his saints, it doesn't mean the Lord is going to cut off your feet and keep it in like a treasure house somewhere, right? Feet, keep is to guard, and feet represent like your ways or your paths. Okay, wherever, like the saying goes, wherever the wind takes you, right? So in the ancient world, that was like a figure of speech. But what it means is that the Lord is going to guard or protect, right, his saints. And the wicked, on the other hand, which the saints represents Israelites, and the wicked, on the other hand, as it says, shall be silent in darkness. Like they're gonna basically fade away in darkness, through calamity or through destruction. For by strength shall no man prevail. So your success or your deliverance is not going to be based on strength. It's not going to be based on anything carnal you can do, but the power of the Lord, which is what she has basically emphasized throughout the verses preceding up to now. Verse 10, the adversaries of the Lord Yahweh shall be broken to pieces. Right, so anyone that comes against the Lord, or the Lord deems an enemy, you don't stand a chance before the Lord. Out of heaven shall he thunder upon them. The Lord Yahweh shall judge the ends of the earth, and he shall give strength unto his king, and exalt the horn of his anointed. And like I mentioned before, right, it's spiritual that she says this because, when you look at it through a spiritual lens, this is what the Lord is going to do ultimately, right? Now, this is what the Lord has always done, in the sense that when she says, "Out of heaven shall he thunder upon them," meaning that the Lord is going to take action against them, right, from his throne. But the Lord has done this, throughout history, but it's going to be on a much larger scale, on a major level in this final prophecy, right, where quite literally the adversaries of the Lord, starting with Esau, Edom, and the wicked of our people, are going to be broken before the Lord, right? And he's gonna basically unleash his wrath, or break forth his wrath upon them. As it says, the Lord shall judge the ends of the earth, right? Meaning the ends of the earth, meaning like the whole planet, right? From one end to another. And he shall give strength unto his king, and exalt the horn of his anointed. Now the king, meaning the king that the Lord would set up or appoint, and his anointed, once again, is synonymous with their king. Because when you look at the for a king to become a king, they had to be anointed, right? In our sense, right? Same with Saul, David, Solomon, they were all anointed. So here, when it mentions exalting the horn of his anointed, is basically raising or giving power to those the Lord would anoint to be king or to lead his people, right? And in the spiritual sense, we know who the ultimate king of Israel that the Lord has strengthened and raised up is, right? Being Yahushua. Verse 11, and Elkanah. So just generally, right, what Hannah is speaking these words in prayer, but they're spiritual words, right? Because you can see a lot of spiritual connections in this. And Elkanah went to Ramah, to his house, and the child did minister. The child referring to Samuel. Remember, he had been lent unto the Lord now. And so he did minister unto the Lord Yahweh before Eli the priest. So minister meaning he served now in the temple with Eli. Now the sons of Eli were sons of Belial, right? Meaning they were like scoundrels, right? They were lowlives. They knew not the Lord, so they didn't fear the Lord, right? Or respect Yahweh Ba'ashem Yahushai. But they were priests by inheritance. And the priest's custom with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant came, while the flesh was in seething, with a flesh hook of 3 teeth in his hand. Now, going back to the law, right, the Lord did say that there would be a portion, right, of the sacrifice that would be obviously given to the priests, right? That would be their portion that they would eat, they would have. And depending on the kind of sacrifice it would be a different part, and so on. But with the sons of Eli, basically what they did in that sense, in knowing that, they took advantage of it, to where they were like not respecting the offering or the sacrifice of the Lord, and just doing whatever they want and abusing their role. So that's, as it says, there was their custom that whenever somebody brought a sacrifice, they would send their servant, and while the animal was seething, right, or cooking or boiling, they would have a flesh hook, which is like a giant fork almost, as it says, of 3 teeth in his hand, meaning it had like, a fork. Your typical fork has like what, four or so, little sharp pointy ends. So this is like a super giant fork with like 3 instead of 4. So the servant will come with this, and he struck it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. All that the flesh hook brought up, the priest took for himself. So he basically would strike the flesh hook in there and pull whatever piece he got, that's what the priest would take. And you left with whatever else is there. So they did in Shiloh unto all the Israelites that came thither. Also, before they burnt the fat, the priest's servant came and said to the man that sacrificed, Give flesh to roast for the priest, for he will not have sodden flesh of thee, but raw. In essence, when you go through the ordinance of the sacrifice, the fat of the animal was burnt as a savor unto the Lord. It was the Lord's portion. And that would be first, right? That, like, the Lord always gets his portion first. But here, as it says, before they could cook the animal or any of that sort of that, or before they could even burn the fat upon the altar, the priest would send his servant and say, like, depending on how they feel, you know, I don't want you to start preparing the animal yet. I want a piece now, because I don't want it boiled, right? I want to roast it. And if any man said unto him, let them not fail to burn the fat presently. So at least let them offer the fat unto the Lord. Let them, because that kind of defeats the purpose, right? So let them finish that part, that ordinance, that offering, and then you can take as much as you want, right? Then take as much as thy soul desireth. Then he would answer him, and this would the servant's response would be, nay, but thou shalt give it me now, and if not, I will take it by force. So nope, I don't want to hear that. I want the part that I want now, and if you don't give it to me, I'm gonna just take it by force, which is wicked as hell. Wherefore the sin of the young men was very great before the Lord Yahweh, for men abhorred the offering of the Lord. So they, through their wicked ways and practices, they stressed out those that came to offer unto the Lord, to where now men, like those that would bring the offering, abhorred the offering of the Lord because of uh, um, the two sons of Eli. And this greatly angered the Lord. Verse 18, but Samuel ministered before the Lord Yahweh, being a child, girded with a linen ephod. So while they were doing this stupid, wicked shit, Samuel, as a boy, he would also serve in the temple, but he would do the right thing, right? Whatever he was taught, obedient, he would do his best, dressed with his priestly array. Moreover, his mother made him a little coat and brought it to him from year to year. So every year when she would come, or let's just say every year, she would make that a nice coat for him and then bring it to him when she came up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And you can imagine, right, how often she would think about Samuel, because having been barren for so long, and then getting finally getting a son, and then offering him to the Lord, obviously she would think about him. Regular mothers, right, that didn't have to go through that, are constantly thinking about their children, right? How much more for one who, gets her child, but now she's offered him, lent them to the Lord. So she's probably looking forward to it every single time they get to go up to Shiloh, right, to see Samuel. And Eli blessed Elkanah, his wife, and Elkanah and his wife, and said, the Lord Yahweh give thee seed of this woman for the loan which is lent to the Lord. So Eli gave Elkanah and Hannah a blessing, right, and saying that for you lending a servant to the Lord, being Samuel, he'll repay you, and as it says, give thee seed of this woman. A seed is a child, offspring. So may the Lord give you more children that from her. And they went on to their home, and the Lord visited Hannah so that she conceived. What that means is not that the Lord came and rang her doorbell, and then when she opened the door, she was pregnant. No, but the Lord remembered her and, had it to where she was very fruitful. So every time, she would get down with Elkanah, he was a busy man. Anyway, every time she would get down with Elkanah, she would be able to get pregnant, okay, more often, and bear 3 sons and 2 daughters. And this goes to show you that pregnancy, right, or having children and all that, it's really of the Lord. In this society, it's made to seem like it's by chance. Oh shit, yeah, I got her pregnant. No, the Lord determines that. It doesn't matter if you, matter of fact, let me not say that. You may have some irresponsible individuals listening and then take it the wrong way. The point here is, whatever happens in the womb, right, is determined of the Lord. Whether a child actually forms, whether a spirit comes in there or not, all of that is, controlled by the Lord. So when it says here that he visited Hannah, the Lord was in control and had it to where her womb was opened so that she could conceive and have children. And the child Samuel grew before the Lord Yahweh. Now Eli was very old, and heard all that his sons did unto Israel, and how they lay with the women that assembled at the door of the tabernacle of the congregations. I mean, these guys were just wicked as hell, on some Al-Azhar 2.0. If you know, you know. Let's look at this in the NLT. Now Eli was very old, but he was aware, and so they were prime examples of like wicked people put in a certain position of authority, and you see what happens. Now Eli was very old, but he was aware of what his sons were doing to the people of Israel. He knew, for instance, that his sons were seducing the young women who assisted at the entrance of the tabernacle. Wicked as man. Anyway, verse 23. And he said unto them, Why do ye such things? For I hear of your evil dealings by all this people. So you can imagine how many complaints there were by the people against Eli's sons to him. Nay, my sons, for it is no good report that I hear. Ye make the Lord Yahweh's people to transgress. If one man sin against another, the judge shall judge him. But if a man sin against the Lord Yahweh, who shall entreat for him? In other words, if you sin and your matter goes to the judge, the Lord can intervene, right? And the judge can judge accordingly. But if you sin against the Lord, ain't nobody that can make intercession on your behalf, right? In the sense that nobody can intervene in the Lord's decision and overturn it. Notwithstanding, they hearkened not unto the voice of their father, because the Lord would slay them. So the Lord put a spirit of them on them to not listen, because he wanted to slay them. He wanted to kill them. And the child Samuel grew on and was in favor both with the Lord Yahweh and also with men. So he was loved, right? He was responsible. He did the right thing, and the Lord, he gained favor with the Lord and also with men, right? And there came a man of God unto Eli and said unto him, and this would be like a prophet, and said unto him, because in the past, in the ancient times, in past times, they weren't always called prophets, right? They were sometimes known as man of God or a seer. So he comes to Eli with a message and says, Thus saith the Lord Yahweh, Did I plainly appear unto the house of thy father when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? Now this is Old English, but I'll substitute it to make it more modern. Meaning, when it says this, in other words, it's saying, did I not plainly appear unto the house of thy father when they were in Egypt in Pharaoh's house? And did I not choose him out of all the tribes of Israel to be my priest, and to offer upon mine altar, and to burn incense, to wear an ephod before me? This is referring to Aaron, right? Because Eli was a priest, and he was descended, and I believe Eli was from the line of Ithamar, right? One of Aaron's sons, right? Because Aaron had Eleazar, Ithamar, and he had two other sons that were slain by the Lord for offering strange fire. Okay, so from Ithamar you had this, like, descended from him is where you have Eli. But anyway, we're going back to verse 28, referencing Aaron here. And did I not give unto the house of thy father all the offerings made by fire of the children of Israel? So, I set up Aaron as a priest, right, of whose line you come from, right? I gave him the ephod. He ministered before me. I gave him of the offerings that the children of Israel offered, so they didn't have to worry about food or any of those. They were taken care of. Wherefore kick ye at my sacrifice? So why then? How is it that you despise? When it says kick ye, it means like to despise my sacrifice and at mine offering, which I have commanded in mine habitation. Honorest thy sons above me, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel my people. So the Lord is saying, I did all this and appointed you in this stead And how is it that now you despise my sacrifice and offering so much that you honor your sons above me? And what the Lord meant by that was knowing what your sons were doing and the great evil that they were doing, you didn't do what you were supposed to do in disciplining them. That talk that they didn't listen to was not enough. Eli was supposed to basically uh, um, kick them out. You supposed to just nah, they're not like depose them of that office, and ban them from doing that. But he the measures that Eli took, it was like soft parenting, and that's not in a case like this. You got to take strict action, and that's what the Lord was expecting, but that's not what Eli did. Hence, the Lord took it as, well, clearly you honor or respect your sons above me, to the point where you basically allow them to keep on doing it. Because how long do you think they were doing this, to where all these complaints kept coming? And then Esau, Eli spoke to his sons, but it says they didn't listen. So what did he do? He just left it. As it says, to make yourselves fat with the chiefest of all the offerings of Israel, my people. Right. So the when they would bring animals, whatever, to offer it, you guys get that, right? You get the nice hefty portions of it, and you're enjoying that. Meanwhile, your sons are doing wickedness, and it's just what it is, right? Wherefore the Lord Yahweh God of Israel saith, I said indeed that thy house and the house of thy father should walk before me forever. But now the Lord Yahweh saith, be it far from me. For them that honor me, I will honor, and they that despise me shall be lightly esteemed. So the Lord was saying here that, in other words, as to where, because of the line you came from, right, of the Levites, of basically descended from Aaron, I had established you, right, and your house, no more. Right now, it doesn't mean the Lord was going to do it with the Levites, but more specifically the house of Eli. So now he says, now I'm not dealing on some, favor by inheritance, just because you descend from such and such. No, those that honor me, those that respect me, I'm gonna honor them. And if you despise me, or you esteem my work lightly, you will be treated the same. All right, you'll be basically regarded as a nobody. Behold, the days come that I will cut off thine arm and the arm of thy father's house. Now, the arm here represents like strength, right, or support. And so the Lord said he would cut off the arm, basically, of Eli and his house, and his father's house, meaning he would weaken the house of Eli and bring them low. And that there shall not be an old man in thine house, meaning of your household, of your descendants, they wouldn't live to old age. And this was basically a like you could say, like a curse or a judgment that the Lord brought upon Eli and his house, his household, his descendants, for this transgression that wasn't addressed. And thou shalt see an enemy in my habitation, in all the wealth which God shall give Israel. Now, when you go into the word enemy here, it's one of the definitions is like difficulty, straits, distress. Okay, so what the Lord was saying here is, upon you, right? You're gonna basically go through distress, or difficulty or hard time, as it says, in my habitation. Now, where's the habitation of the Lord? In Israel, right? So, being that they were still priests, they would still be in the land, right? But they would the Lord was about to have his descendants basically suffer, difficulties or straits, without ceasing, right? So there will be calamities that will come upon them, as it says, basically in the land, in the midst, right? It says, in all the wealth which God shall give Israel. So when the Lord blesses, even when the Lord blesses Israel, they wouldn't be fortunate to really partake of that. Okay. And this is just, in other words, the Lord is saying that I'm going to, one, take you out of this office. Two, I'm going to weaken your house. And three, I'm going to bring you into a state to where you and your descendants are going to experience hardships. And there shall not be an old man in thine house forever. Once again, that they wouldn't live to see old age, right, or have that peace. This is the NLT. It says, and NIV is also going too. You will watch with envy as I pour out prosperity on the people of Israel, but no members of your family will ever live out their days. NIV, and you will see distress in my dwelling. Although good will be done to Israel, no one in your family line will ever reach old age. Damn. And the man of thine, whom I shall not cut off from mine altar, shall be to consume thine eyes. So the Lord is saying, I'm not going to, necessarily cut off your lineage, right? So those that survive, those of your descendants, that I don't destroy, as it says, I'm going to basically leave them. I'm going to leave you descendants, and they would be to consume thine eyes and to grieve thine heart. Meaning, like, the condition they would end up in would be that if witnessed, it would be grievous to your heart, right? And it would basically bring distress upon you. Now, that's why I said if to be witnessed, because even though Eli would be dead at this time, this would still be fulfilled. And all the increase of thine house, meaning all of your descendants, shall die in the flower of their age. So that's like the third time the Lord has emphasized that point of them not seeing old age or living to old age. And living to old age symbolizes like peace as well, right? Like that you've been able to live a full life, and technically you kind of like go to the grave in some level of peace, but that wouldn't be the case for them. And this shall be a sign unto thee that shall come upon thy two sons. So this will be the proof that I'm going to do this to you. Concerning your two sons, right, on Hophni and Phinehas, the wicked ones, right, that were doing all this wickedness, in one day they shall die, both of them. So I'm going to slay both of them in one day. And I will raise me up a faithful priest that shall do according to that which is in mine heart and in my mind. And I will build him a sure house, so I will establish his household, and he shall walk before mine anointed forever. Okay, now when you go, as we've already covered, but when you go forward into the future, as the Lord executed this judgment upon the house of Eli, all the way down to the time of King Solomon, right, you had Abiathar, which was a descendant of the line of Eli. Okay, and it was during his time that, let me just actually read it. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 26, it says, and unto Abiathar the priest said the king, because what the Lord was saying here is that he was going to replace, because remember, Eli and his sons, they were basically in that role, right? Of them would come the high priest and so on and so forth. But the Lord was saying that he was going to replace them. And that's basically what happened when you go to 1 Kings 2 and 26. And unto Abiathar the priest said the king, get thee to Anathoth unto thine own fields, for thou art not worthy of death. So I'm not going to put you to death, but I will not at this time put thee to death. Or Slakia, for thou art worthy of death, but I will not at this time put you to death. So even though I should, I'm not going to. Because thou bearest the ark of the Lord Yahweh before David my father, and because thou hast been afflicted in all wherein my father was afflicted. Right. So during King David's time, you were there. Right. And you sort of went through it with him. So because of that, for that sake, I'm not going to put you to death. So Solomon thrust out Abiathar from being priest unto the Lord Yahweh, that he might fulfill the word of the Lord Yahweh, which he spake concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh, which is what we're reading here in 1 Samuel. So after basically removing Abiathar from that office, when you jump down to the 35th verse, he replaces Abiathar with Zadok. Okay, and the significance in that, let me read it. It says, and the king put Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, in his room, meaning in his stead, over the host. I believe that was replacing Joab's position, right, and putting Benaiah in there. And Zadok the priest did the king put in the room of Abiathar. So to take on that basically that role, right, in replacing Abiathar with Zadok. Now Zadok was, they were both from Aaron. However, Zadok was of the line of Eleazar. Okay, and um, so from Aaron's son Eleazar's line comes Zadok, and from Aaron's other son, um, Ithamar, came Eli, of whose descendant was Abiathar. Okay, so going back to 1 Samuel 2 and 35, when the Lord mentioned raising him up a faithful priest that would do according to all that was in his heart and in his mind, and building him a sure house, or establishing his house, and that he will walk before the Lord's anointed, which would be those that would be anointed to be king, right? The Lord, in process of time, the Lord ended up having basically Zadok fulfill that, right, on a carnal level, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. But by removing Abiathar and setting up Zadok, now you had Zadok in that stead. And so now it would be from the line of Zadok on down, basically is where you would have the priests. Okay, so the priests would now be from, even though they were all Levites, they would be from the line of Zadok, okay, as opposed to the line that descended from Eli. Now, ultimately, right, in the spiritual sense, the true high priest, right, as we know that this would spiritually really apply to, would be Yahushai, right? And I have a quick precept for that. Though this was fulfilled with what King Solomon did, right, with Zadok, you know, there are always multi layers to some of these precepts, right? So this is Hebrews 3 and 1. It says, "Wherefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our profession, Hamashiach Yahushai, who was faithful to him that appointed him," which is who? The Most High, "as also Moses was faithful in all his house." Okay, so even though, you know, for the prophecy's sake and for the fulfillment of the Lord's judgment's sake, he had this happen at the point of removing Abiathar and setting up Zadok in his stead, you know, through the Spirit, right? Ultimately, this would truly be fulfilled in Yahushua, because he ultimately is the one who's going to have that sure house, right? The house of David, that would be forever. Okay, just wanted to throw that spiritual nugget in there. But just once again, on the carnal sense, that was fulfilled in First Kings, as it tells you in the 27th verse, right? First Kings 2 and 7, 2 and 27, that when Solomon did this, he fulfilled basically the word that the Lord spake unto Eli. So continuing in verse 36, "And it shall come to pass that every one that is left in thine house shall come and crouch to him for a piece of silver and a morsel of bread, and shall say, Put me, I pray thee, into one of the priest's offices, that I may eat a piece of bread." Now, this doesn't mean that like literally those that descended from Eli will come and bow to like Zadok and beg. But what it signifies was that they would you know, suffering the judgment that the Lord would bring upon them, they would go through hardships, you know, as to where at one point, being in the priest's office, they were taken care of, right? They didn't want for anything, right? They had the food, they had, you know, basically things that were offered onto them, so they were taken care of. All right. However, now being removed from that office, you know, and basically thrust out to have another in there, what this signifies is that the descendants of Eli would be lacking, okay, and hoping that they could just be put back into that office that they once were, to be taken care of again, you know, and to have that you know, the bread and the shoe bread, the offerings, and all of those things as before, okay, but that wouldn't be the case. So this was, you know, this was a heavy judgment that the Lord brought upon Eli and his house. But when you look at, you know, what it is that Eli's sons were doing and how wicked it was, you see why the Lord had that happen. So with that, that's the end of 1 Samuel, the 2nd chapter. Lord willing, this is edifying to the elect. In closing, I want to give all praises, honor, and glory to Yahweh, Bahasham Yahushai, Bahasham, Recha Kodash. And until next time, Shalom.